I spend a lot of time at my desk, and it has some serious problems. It's old and beat up, it sags in the middle, it has a missing drawer. I've had multiple shoulder surgeries, and this part hurts my shoulders, while this part hurts my knees. It's time to build something better. Okay, so I've been away from my shop for a little while. Life just forced me to prioritize some other things for the last couple of years. If you've seen any of my other videos, you might notice that some things around my shop have changed since my last build, which was actually recorded before my time out here started to get limited. But now, I'm finally able to start working on some projects again. And I'm going to ease into that a little bit with a new sit-stand desk for my office that I can get done over my holiday vacation. Building this on a sit-stand frame simplifies that build so that I can be sure to be done on my time off, but I won't be using the brand that's sponsoring builds all over YouTube. I don't have sponsors, and there are more affordable options out there. So this is the direction I went. I picked up a set of sequential boards from a local sawmill. These boards all had bark inclusions and cracks and checking that needed to be filled with epoxy. I sealed the areas where the color would bleed with clear epoxy and then filled all the voids with dark brown dyed epoxy. After it cures, I like to remove the excess epoxy with a heat gun and a chisel before milling the boards any further. These boards were big and a little hard to handle, which will actually bite me a little bit later on, but they were a little wide even for my 12-inch jointer. I had to trim the width a little bit before I could joint the faces and plane them down to thickness. After that, I prepped them for their second round of epoxy fills. Milling will open up smaller holes and cause some chip out in the original epoxy fills, and it always takes multiple rounds of filling consecutively smaller and smaller holes. In preparation for glue up, I attempted to joint these edges at the jointer, but because these boards were so heavy and my jointer bed is just a little short for this, the boards ended up with a little bit more of a spring joint than I would like. I also tried to joint them one at a time, but ultimately I just had to move to the table saw for a light pass to get them straight.
I wish I made it worse.
Still not perfect, but much better. So I'm working without a plan really at this point. Like I haven't drawn anything up. The only thing I have to go by is the size of the actual sit-stand frame that I'm going to be using. So I'm just trying to get these pieces laid out, figure out how big I want this thing. It specifies a kind of certain pattern where there's a main and a return, and it kind of requires you take the second piece of the desk and butt it up, and I'll address that later, but I'm just trying to figure out size. And I have to use the full length on this, what did it call it? This is the main. Call it, the full length on the main here. So I want to get every inch of that I can. This piece down here has some snipe on the end of it that I need to cut off, and I can only make this one 64 inches, just like 153 centimeters. So like this makes the most sense to have this layout, because then I'll keep the most length and I'll have a much bigger area over here. So I think this works. I think this is the layout I want, but really I need to go back up into my office and kind of measure and say, does that mean now I've got to put my computer over here and my monitors over here? I think it'd be fine if I did. This is the downside of working without a plan.
After remeasuring, I pretty much confirmed my rambling plan and marked everything out to glue up. I did end up buying a domino while I was MIA from YouTube. I learned my lesson with cutting mortises on my slot mortiser with those large boards, but that won't be going anywhere. It can still do things that the domino can't, but this is one case where the domino will be easier. After mortising for the dominoes, I glued up the 2 desktops and trimmed up the ends with this Craig track attachment. I was pretty disappointed with this cut and decided that I really need to invest in a real track saw. Here you can see that area with the snipe that I had to remove.
So I just did my first round of epoxy touch-ups. The first coat of epoxy is never 100%, but also that coat I had run through the planer, knowing that I'd have to come back to it, and I had a bunch of chip out and stuff. So I filled that, but now I've gone and sanded this down, and it's kind of highlighted a couple areas that I'm going to need to fix. So here, let me show you. All right, I don't know how well this is going to come out on camera, but I struggled a little bit getting straight edges on these boards, and I ran it through the planer. I tried doing it that way, but my planer bed just kind of wasn't long enough for how big and heavy these boards were. But as a result of that not quite being perfectly straight, I've got 2 areas, one right there and one right here on this desktop, that have a tiny little hairline gap there. And I'm not sure if it goes through all the way, but I'm gonna have to take care of that. And the other thing is, I've got, with all the figure I've got in this, there's a bunch of these tiny little surface cracks. And I think they are surface cracks. I don't think they go down deep at all. But now that I've sanded them, I see some of these pop up. So I'm gonna have to deal with those. The other thing too is there's a little bit of chip out in some of the more figured areas that I'm going to have to make sure I sand through, but shouldn't be too hard to fix. All right, I've got this laid upside down so that I can make sure that the desk was sized up properly. But that's gonna allow me to do, a couple other things. The kit came with just a bunch of screws. They want you to kind of run through each of these spots and just screw into the wood. I'm not doing that. I'm gonna do threaded inserts and I'm gonna do bolts. The other thing is, the kit comes with what they call these joining plates. You're supposed to kind of lay down across the joints here, and that's how you're supposed to connect the 2 desktops. Well, no. What I'm going to do instead, I'm going to put a couple of dominoes in, and they're going to be glued into one side of this desktop and not into the other. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a couple of these. I don't even know what these things are called, but it's a common hardware for bedposts or for doing tabletops like this. So while I've got this laid out like this, I can mark out. I'm going to put 2 in. I'm going to put 1 on either side here, and then I'll mark out all my bolt holes. So I want to make sure I have enough room to get in here with a wrench underneath of it. So yeah, we can probably go 5 inches in. That should work.
Cable management is an absolute must for me. I use 3 monitors, well, actually 4, I guess sometimes, and enough accessories that can make a mess that I just won't be able to handle. So I'll be adding some pass-through grommets in the desktop and a cable tray underneath. And that cable tray will also serve the dual purpose of hiding the top of the desktop frame and giving it a little bit more of a substantial look.
So a minute ago, I was struggling, trying to figure out why the hell this thing was so hard to balance. And then I realized I never put the adapter on there to be able to do these cuts.
Whenever I have to drill a through hole with a Forstner bit, a little trick I like to use is to drill a pilot hole all the way through first. That way I can register the point of the Forstner bit in the pilot hole, drill halfway, flip the board and have the same registration point on the other side to drill from there and not have to worry about blowout. Before gluing up the cable tray, I made sure to round over and sand the inside of all the tray parts. The glue up itself was an easy one, but it must have been close to dinner time because Ruck and Jody were there to remind me that they were on the verge of absolutely starving to death. I rushed through adding every clamp I could fit onto the trays and headed inside to get the dogs fed. And yes, that is a miniature version of my kitchen table that Ruck is eating off of. So with that crisis averted, I could get back out to the shop where I still have a few details to take care of. First, I'll drill for some brass rods that I'll be adding later to help with cable management. I do use this absurdly long drill bit to get all the way through, but it's a good thing that I drill a nice straight pilot hole first, looking at how crooked I am here. I also need to get the rest of the roundovers taken care of, but I needed the 2 desktops fit together before I could do that.
All right, I have one last step to do before I flip this over and finish the other side, and that's to install these brass rods. They're 1/8 inch brass rods. And the idea with these is that it's going to be a simple way to keep cables in the cable tray. They'll just run behind it, and it'll keep them from flopping out. The hope is that this way I won't need to, wrap cables up or use cable ties or anything like that. And I'll easily be able to move them in and out because they'll just be laying loosely in there, but they'll still be neatly contained within the cable tray. So unpopular opinion here. I don't like the look of hard wax oil on furniture. I like the semi-gloss of a good wipe-on poly. It's a little bit more labor intensive. I have to clean everything off first and multiple coats and time in between each coat to cure, but you just can't beat the look of it. I use Armor Seal. So this is just mineral spirits. I'm wiping everything down with mineral spirits. I already vacuumed it off, but you can see, even after vacuuming it, there's still quite a bit left on the wood.
I ended up putting on 5 total coats of poly. The first 3 were gloss, and then the last 2 were semi-gloss. I typically sand with a 2000 grit wet dry paper between coats to get rid of all the dust nibs.
Okay, I have one last thing to do here before I can assemble the desk, and that is to take care of these holes. You can see they are slotted, which is great, allows for some nice movement, except it's in the wrong direction. The table's going to expand this way, not this way. So I'm just going to round them out to a slightly larger size to allow for that movement side to side. So my monitor is going to mount here, and the stand has kind of a hard bottom to it, and I don't want to damage the wood. And it also sits flat, so I'm not putting in one of these grommets. So instead what I did is I 3D printed some parts here that I designed to match the base of the stand. This is TPU, And how this will work is this will sit in like this. The TPU will go against the desktop. This is thinner, it's less deep than the desktop is, so there'll be a little bit of a gap. That'll go there. The monitor stand will go on top of it, and then this comes up from the bottom. So that's a little bit of a tight fit, but so this will come up from the bottom, and that'll bolt into the bottom of the stand. And this way I have a nice wide flat surface also that won't get damaged by this piece. So let's get that put in.
Well, that's it for this one. It feels good to be back building furniture and making videos again. I have some more projects that I'm looking forward to in 2025, so thanks for watching. I hope I'll see you then.